Jim Schmidt was only 14 years old when he decided he could not wait any longer to fight in the war. In the small Iowa town where he grew up, the sound of the evening radio carried the world's battles straight into family kitchens. Every broadcast spoke of invasion, sacrifice, and victory. His two older brothers were already overseas, and every letter they sent back fueled his restlessness. For Jim, staying home began to feel like betrayal. He was small, quick, and determined. His father worked long hours at the grain mill. His mother prayed by the window. They thought the war would pass like a distant storm, but for Jim, it drew closer every day. He practiced writing his brother's birth date in careful, deliberate script, lowering his voice when he said his name. At 14, he looked younger, but hunger and purpose aged him. The recruiting office in Des Moines was noisy that afternoon. Men lined up with their papers. Recruiters barked questions over typewriters. Jim stepped forward with his forged birth certificate and said he was 18. The sergeant never looked up for long. America needed soldiers. His signature was enough. Within weeks he was in uniform, his boots too large, the rifle awkward in his hands. Training camp was its own kind of war. Each morning began before sunrise. Each night ended beneath aching muscles. The language of boys was replaced by the bark of orders. As days merged into weeks, the new recruits lost track of who they'd been before. In that anonymity, Jim's secret remained safe. He learned quickly. He learned to strip a rifle blindfolded, to march in rhythm, to ignore pain and to swallow fear. No one suspected, or perhaps no one cared. They called him Little Brother, a name half teasing, half protective. When letters from home arrived for others, Jim wrote none. He had told no one where he was going. By spring of 1944, the 94th Infantry Division prepared for Europe. The world beyond the ocean waited in ruin and flame. Jim stood among men twice his age on the crowded deck of a transport ship, staring toward the horizon as the American coastline slipped away. Somewhere beyond the waves lay the war he had dreamed of and feared in equal measure. France was devastation. Made real, the first time he stepped off the truck, he smelled smoke and metal. The villages they passed were husks of brick and ash. The distant gunfire sounded like the earth cracking. He followed the others, shoveling trenches, hauling crates, and obeying every command with silent precision. The laughter that had once filled the barracks was gone. Days became mud and nights became waiting. Yet Jim did not break. The soldiers came to trust him as they trusted one another. No one asked how old he was. In war, every man fought to keep the others alive. Near Lorient, small villages turned into battlegrounds. German resistance clung to towns and fields, retreating only when the bombardments left nothing standing. Jim fired his first shot in the confusion of one such fight. The kick of the rifle bruised his shoulder. Somewhere ahead, a man he could not see fell. He did not remember pulling the trigger, only the ringing in his ears afterward. That night, he couldn't sleep. He cleaned his weapon again and again until dawn. Part of him wanted to run back to the farm. Another part knew there was no going home until the job was done. The season turned cold. By December, the ground in Belgium had frozen solid, and rumors whispered through the ranks of an impending German counterattack. Then in darkness before dawn on December 16th, the forest erupted. Explosions shook the snow from the trees. Men shouted orders drowned by the thunder of artillery. It was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, and Jim Schmidt was caught in its heart. For days they were pinned down in shallow dugouts, low on food and nearly out of ammunition. Snow buried everything. The air froze breath before it left their mouths. When communications failed, there was only silence, and the enemy closing in. During one bombardment, the radio cable snapped, cutting them off entirely. The squad's survival depended on that line being restored. Jim volunteered before anyone else spoke. He crawled into open white ground, carrying the coiled wire across a field of shattered trees. Bullets chased him through the snow. One sliced the rim of his helmet. Another struck the ice inches from his arm. He kept moving, pressing the cold earth for life that wasn't there till he found the break, fastened the ends together, and the signal returned. Minutes later, reinforcements arrived, guided by that reconnected wire. The platoon lived because of it. When they realized who had done it, no one cheered. They were too stunned, too tired. But word spread, and the men began to look at the quiet boy differently. The battle dragged on for weeks. The lines shifted back and forth. Jim watched friends freeze to death beside him. He watched medics carry away pieces of men who had been whole the day before. Every face grew hollowed, older, timeless. And yet he endured. When the snow began to melt, the Germans were finally pushed back. The Allies had won the Bulge, but left tens of thousands dead. Jim was among the survivors, gaunt and pale. During a routine inspection after the offensive, a medic studying his record noticed something strange about his birth date. He questioned Jim once, then again. The truth spilled out quietly. He was 14. Within days, an official order came through. Jim was to be sent home immediately. No public reprimand, no story in the papers, just an administrative removal. And silence. The army couldn't celebrate what it couldn't acknowledge. He left Europe the same way he entered it, on a crowded ship, this time heading west. Others joked, smoked, or sang softly about home. Jim stood alone, holding a small duffel bag and staring at the horizon. When the train pulled into Cedar Falls, his mother was waiting on the platform. Her son looked unfamiliar, thinner and older. She hugged him with tears in her eyes, whispering, "Thank you," prayers no one else could hear. But when she looked closer, she saw that something behind his eyes had changed forever. He didn't talk much after coming back. The war had burned away language. He returned to school for a while, but quit soon after, saying he already knew what life could teach him. He found a job at a nearby factory, married a local girl, and tried to fill the quiet with work. At night, sometimes he'd wake up sweating, hearing gunfire that wasn't there. He'd walk onto the porch and smoke in silence until the trembling stopped. When neighbors asked about the war, he'd shrug and say, "I got through it." He never mentioned his age, and almost no one asked. Decades passed before his story resurfaced. Historians collecting veterans' testimonies visited his town and learned of a rumor about a boy soldier. Jim finally agreed to speak. From a wooden box he kept under his bed, he pulled out his original uniform patch, his tarnished dog tags, and the fragile birth certificate that had changed his life. Its corners were brown and curling. The handwriting that claimed he was born in 1925 was still neat and careful. He told them everything: the training, the fear, the frostbite, the friends who never came home. He admitted that he lied out of pride, but mostly out of loneliness. His brothers were fighting, and he couldn't bear the thought of being left behind. He wasn't chasing glory. He was chasing belonging. Researchers later confirmed that at least 300 American boys under the legal age had served during World War II. Some were 16, a few 15, and a handful, astonishingly, just 12 or 13. Most never revealed their true ages. The war blurred such details into necessity. Jim lived quietly afterward, rarely revisiting the subject again. When he passed away, local veterans groups placed an American flag on his grave. None of them had known, until late in his life, just how young he'd been when he first put on the uniform. His story stands as a reminder that courage does not belong to any particular age. It belongs to the human spirit when pressed against impossible choice. Jim had wanted to grow up fast, and the war granted that wish too completely. He never received medals or parades, and perhaps that was fitting. He didn't fight to be honored. He fought to belong, and in that belonging, he carried the weight of thousands who never returned. The boy who once pretended to be a man became one before he was ready, and carried that truth until his last day. Even now, people struggle to imagine what it means to be so young in such a vast and merciless conflict. Yet buried within that unimaginable story is the quiet power of endurance. Jim Schmidt's life shows that heroism is not limited by age. Sometimes it's defined by a dot. To remember him is to remember every hidden name, every young soul who chose duty over childhood. They did not ask for glory. They asked to do their part, and in doing so, they remind us how fragile courage can look. A boy in a man's uniform, standing in the snow holding the line, Would you like this expanded into a formatted screenplay version for voiceover pacing and visual scenes, or kept purely as this continuous narrative prose?